Hi, this is Chiezan, the prior at SokukoJi Buddhist Monastery. Sokuzan offers these talks without expecting anything in return. If you value these talks and would like them to continue, please visit our donate page at www.sokukoji.org. Thank you.
Thank you for being here this evening for basic Buddhist teachings. In some sense, tonight I'm going to be following up on last week. Last week, we had a whole weekend talking about different lineage holders that have come throughout the last 2,500 years to make these teachings available. And tonight I'm going to continue to speak about some of our early Indian ancestors, particularly some of the early matriarchs. And so there's two women I'd like to talk about tonight, and a little bit about maybe a more traditional way that the feminine approach has been incorporated in Zen, in Buddhism. And those two women, you may recognize their names from our morning mother lineage chant, or just perhaps from studying Buddhism. The first one is Patachara. And Patachara led a life not dissimilar to another famous female ancestor. In some sense, their stories have been synonymous with Kisa Gotami. Patachara is said to have led a pretty tragic life, that she was born into nobility but fell in love with a servant and became impregnated by the servant and eloped. And it's traditional in India for a woman to return to her family home to give birth. And she decided that that's what she would do with this child she was carrying. I believe it was a son. And initially, her partner, husband, was very opposed to this. She insisted upon it, and on her way back to her family home, she gave birth to a son. At this point, she said, well, let's just turn around and go home. Went home. And it happened a second time. She got pregnant. She said, I want to give birth at my family home. The husband objected. She insisted, and they went on their way. And she gave birth. And as I understand it, at some point, the husband was bitten by a snake and died instantly. And they came to a river, and I'm going to go to my family home. And so she leaves the older son on one bank and carries the baby across. And so she's swimming back across the river, and a vulture comes and takes the baby. And she starts screaming. And so then the older son thinks, Mom's calling for me, and gets into the river and is swept away. Loses both children. Continues on her way to her family home, where she finds her entire family has died from their house collapsing in a storm. And at this point, she goes mad. She rips all of her clothes off and just is screaming, crying, wailing. Her life is devastated. And the story goes that eventually she found herself at the feet of the Buddha and explained her situation. And in this story that I read, the Buddha simply explained to her the nature of dependent origination. She had an instant insight of emptiness. She attained the level of an arhat and was considered his foremost bhikkhuni in the Vinaya, meaning that she studied the monastic code. And she was the most versed in monastic code, which, as some of you know, was dramatically different for the women than for the men. And this ties into the other woman I wanted to talk about, which is what I would consider the matriarch of all of Buddhism, which would be Mahapajapati. And Mahapajapati was the woman who raised the Buddha after his mother died. So Mahapajapati and Mahamaya were sisters, and they are both said to have married King Suddhodana. And after Maya's death, giving birth to the Buddha, Mahapajapati took on the role of the mother and raised Siddhartha as her own. Eventually, the Buddha had his realization and started the Sangha. King Suddhodana died, and Mahapajapati decided that she would follow the teachings of the Buddha, and she wanted to ordain, and was initially rejected. The Buddha said no. And it was Ananda, his closest disciple, that said, well, don't all beings have Buddha nature? And the Buddha says, yes. Well, then why wouldn't we ordain the women? And the Buddha said, okay, but he made an exception. And he laid out initially with Mahapajapati 8 additional rules called the Garudama. And these rules are disputed. There's some dispute whether these were actually part of the original teachings of the Buddha, or if they were inserted later as commentary, or so the historicity is unclear. But the idea with these 8 rules was essentially to create an order of nuns that were in all regards subservient and at the mercy of the men's monastic sangha. And so I wanted to share these 8 rules that Mahapajapati agreed to, and through her agreement, the Buddha allowed for her to be ordained. And again, these are the first 8. Later on, the men had 227 rules of conduct, and the women had 311. So nearly 100 additional rules. But the first is that a nun, no matter how long they've been ordained, they've been ordained 100 years, were still expected to rise and reverently greet every monk they encountered, even if they had just been ordained 1 second before. The bhikkhunis, the sangha of women, were not allowed to spend the rainy season, or ango, the 3-month rainy season, in a district where there were not monks present. Every half moon, the nuns had to wait for the monks, the bhikshus, to give them the date of the upasata, which is a date of intensified practice and acknowledgement of maybe perhaps transgressions, as well as when the monks would come to give teachings. After the rainy season retreat, the monks were to inquire as to whether any faults had been committed before both sanghas, both the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, that anything that had been heard, seen, or suspected. Any nun that was guilty of a serious offense had to undergo manata, discipline, before both the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, which was 2 weeks of penance or half a month's penance. When a novice had trained for 2 years in the 6 precepts, which is the first 5 precepts we understand, and the novices also took a 6th precept not to eat afternoon. There was the 1 meal a day that was a novice vow. Then they could seek ordination from both sanghas. A nun was never to revile or abuse a monk under any circumstances. And lastly, admonition by bhikkhunis of bhikshus was forbidden, where admonition of nuns by monks was not forbidden. So it's a very difficult situation. And it's easy to maybe speculate. We could justify anything. Well, the Buddha had to do this so it wasn't too radical, or, this is unacceptable or that. But in the end, it's just simply to me an acknowledgement of a type of adversity on the path that led Padmasambhava saying to Yeshe Sogyo that perhaps being born a woman actually better suits you or prepares you for the path because of the profound difficulties culturally and societally. And so I looked at some of these poems by these early women, these profound masters of the dharmas and arhats. And I wanted to read one from Patachara and one from Mahapajapati. So Patachara, being the foremost disciple of the Buddha in the Vinaya, had quite a following. She was responsible for a number of bhikkhunis. And so this is called Patachara's 30 Nuns. Farmers take grain from the earth and branches from the trees. They crack open one with the other and take what's left to feed their families. You are all like unripe grain. Take time to grow. Then leave the ground behind and let your husks be stripped away. I promise, less is more. So Patachara told us. So we sat on the ground like unripe grain. We gave ourselves to the path, and the path broke us apart. What we feared most is now seen for what it is. True peace, freedom. All that broke apart was the darkness we had for so long been calling our whole world. This other one's a little bit more difficult for me to read, and before I read it, I want to bring in this idea of the term is robaishin, and my understanding was this is a term first coined by Dogen in the 13th century and translates to grandmother's heart. And we know Shin is a character that's we have to be careful in translating because it's not just heart. It's not just heart. It's heart mind. It's something much more profound and deep. And in one of these stories, one of the nuns is talking to the other nuns and saying, that which breaks and shatters and has sharp edges, this isn't your heart. So like acknowledging your heart is broken. That's not what we're talking about with Shin. Of course, I don't know Hridaya. I think Hridaya is the sound. Do you know Hridaya? Is that the heart sutra? Hridaya.
Yes.
So Robaishin is this unique term that is used in Zen, and as I said, it means the grandmother's heart. And I wanted to read just this brief thing from a well-known calligrapher, Kazuaki Tanahashi, who talked about Robaishin. He said, the grandmother, she is a person of no rank, having no interest in worldly power. So right away, this is Linji, Zen Master Rinzai. This is one of his earliest teachings, a person of no rank. So the grandmother is without rank, no interest in worldly power, and the worldly dharmas don't touch her. I like this. She has no credibility and doesn't want or need anything. She has been overlooked and also overlooks. She also has a heart made fierce and brave by adversity. The four abodes are her nature. And the four abodes, while we know them by a different name, this is the Brahma Viharas. May all beings enjoy happiness and the root of happiness. And simply acknowledge loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity. So this is the nature of Robaishin, the grandmother's heart. And I think it's interesting that this term was coined by such a profoundly intense masculine form of Buddhism. And it often is not something that's visible, which if you think about it, why would it be? That's the very thing that's being acknowledged, that it does not need your attention. It gives endlessly. And in my recent studies, this is something the great Zen master Kodo Sawaki Roshi lamented that he didn't really understand. At one point, he was sent these two young children, and Kodo Sawaki Roshi was the epitome of masculine Zen master. I mean, when he was in retreat, he would start sitting at 2 a.m. and would sit until 10 a.m. or 10 p.m. During his sessions with his monks, he'd start at 1:30 a.m. until 10 p.m. And while he was very charismatic, he acknowledged he didn't know how to relate in a way to express that type of care. The way it's phrased in the Sadhana of Mahamudra, I believe talking perhaps about Karmapakshi, he cares for whatever needs his care. So this intelligence to see whatever needs one's care. So this grandmother's love, this grandmother's heart, is something I'm pretty curious about, and it's hard to find because it's not screaming in your face. that kind so powerful it doesn't need validation. And so this is Patachara, or Mahapajapati's. This is a hard one for me to read. I've been practicing, trying to like just get through it. And you will recognize this. You will recognize this in Buddhism from the phrase, everyone has been your mother. Everyone has been your mother. Everyone has been your child. And Mahapajapati says, I know you all. I have been your mother, your son, your father, your daughter. You see me now in my final role. Kindly grandmother. It's a fine part to go out on. You might have heard how it all began when my sister died, and I took her newborn son to raise as my own. People still ask, did you know then what he would become? What can I say? What mother doesn't see a Buddha in her child? He was such a quiet boy. The first time he reached for me, the first time I held him while he slept, how could I not know? To care for all children, without exception, as though each will someday be the one to show us all the way home. This is the path. And so it really has to be acknowledged, this coming together of wisdom and compassion, because the attitude doesn't suffice. The attitude is idealism. The attitude is it sounds nice. The attitude is I want to be the loving grandmother. And the wisdom without the compassion is Kodo Sawaki, great Zen master, on a revitalization of shikantaza in Japan that was desperately needed. But maybe there was some acknowledgement there he had with trying to relate to children. And so while we practice, and we take our practice very seriously, to just consider for one moment that every being we interact with is the Buddha and is a child to be nurtured to realization for the benefit of all beings. It's easier to see it in a young child because there's a kind of condescension that happens with children, and that's how it feels a little bit. It's a lot easier to have them be your thoughts. But to care for a child, it doesn't require much other than just seeing that there's something that needs your attention. But the Robaishin, the grandmother's heart, is that kind of recognition that nothing is threatening you. You don't need to defend your practice or your understanding. There's no hierarchy, there's no enemy, and therefore everyone arises as one's child, as one's mother, one's father, as one's son. And it's difficult to understand how to work with that type of energy other than to continue to see the type of aggression that we may or may not harbor around our own practice, that we continue to see threats to our practice. We continue to see those that are obstacles or obstructions on the path, instead of seeing everything as that invitation into the very thing we need to see. And so if you get a chance, this the first Free Women, Poems of Early Buddhist Nuns, it's really wonderful. It's somewhat candid too, in the sense that these were bhikkhunis talking to bhikkhunis, and so they had some humor, and they were able to acknowledge openly some of the difficulties they face. And yet the determination, in spite of that, to see the truth for themselves, to liberate their mind and to liberate others. So if there's any questions, I would do my best to respond to those.
Yvonne, could you read that line again about caring for the children? It was towards the end there, I believe.
Should have told me not to put my bookmark out. To care for all children without exception, as though each will someday be the one to show us all the way home. This is the path.
When you're bowing. Couldn't help but flash on all the children that are being killed in Gaza. And wonder how many Buddhas are lost. So as people sitting here on the other side of the world in the face of that, what kind of compassion can we bring forth for all those dead children? No.
I don't know that I could say other than it feels like we shouldn't forget the people we see when we exit the door. That, 2 years ago, there was a 2-year-old shot in their crib, a mile from here. Just up the road, a 17-year-old was killed 2 or 3 years ago. There was a football player at Claude Evans Park that was shot about 4 years ago. Our neighbor was murdered 8 years ago. And so I don't think that we have to go so far, and it's not to ignore the depths of suffering that's occurring in the world, but I see an indifference sometimes to the very community we've planted ourselves in, or an isolation in the very community we've planted ourselves in that is suffering hunger and homelessness and violence and abuse. And so our primary situation is to begin to look at the mind, but that doesn't mean that we don't do anything else, that we spend our time training the mind. We look at the very nature of prejudice. And something as simple as just showing up in a community and not being in the community, but being a part of the community is very important to me. That it's very difficult to help somebody if you keep a distance from them. And so I know it sounds probably a bit silly, or maybe it doesn't, I don't know. But to just go out and meet the neighbors and to go into stores and get to know the people that are running them. I feel incredibly grateful at times that I can't hardly leave the temple anymore without seeing at least one person I know. And there's something that feels really special about that. And so I would encourage everybody to not look to the news to find where you need to place your compassion, but look within the room that you're in, or look outside your door to recognize that suffering is not just in one part of the world. It's happening here in this room, it's happening in the houses next to us, it's happening in the communities around us. And so to just show up, to me, perhaps is the best thing we can do without an agenda. It's not like a plan to go out and help the community. It's just literally showing up and being available, being present. I think that goes a long way. Yuda.
Yuda. I read a while ago that the Buddha also said that because he allowed women into the Sangha, that the Dharma, instead of lasting 1,000 years, would last only 500 or something like that. Do you have anything to say about that, Bowie?
I don't. I don't, because the only thing I could say would be to say, well, maybe the Buddha didn't really say that, or justify why he might have said that, or go on something about why he shouldn't have said that. The Dharma is alive to me here. And I think that that's perhaps the most important thing, and not to dismiss or say that that's whoever said that, or however that information came to us, that that's valid, but to nurture the Buddha Dharma as it arises here. That's what we can do. We can be Robaishin, we can be the nurturers of these teachings. I think it actually showed up in this book. Maybe this is where you read it. First Buddhist Women, Poems and Stories of Awakening by Susan Murcott. Is that where you read it? And perhaps you saw it somewhere else.
You doubling? No, it was in the book from Kodo about the Buddha's life.
I've read something similar. Further questions? Sokusan?
You used the term arhat. Could you say, define what that is, or how your understanding of it is? Thank you.
Thank you. My understanding is a little bit limited, but the arhat is, I believe, like the ideal, the archetype within Theravada Buddhism, just as the Mahayanists have the Bodhisattva, the arhat has liberated oneself from defilements or detachments, so there is liberation. The difference being is sometimes the way it's presented as being an actual elimination of defilements. You've actually uprooted all of your defilements, and it is said that right after the Buddha's death, that I think it was 500 arhats came together to bring together the Pali Canon, and the story was that who's standing next to Ananda? Mahakasyapa. Thank you. That Mahakasyapa wouldn't let Ananda in because he hadn't attained arhatship. So Ananda had to sit outside the council, and luckily became an arhat and was invited into the council. But some realization of no self has occurred in the arhat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So one last thing is can or does the arhat function in the same way a bodhisattva does, but just doesn't have the name?
This is pretty subjective, but I feel that they do. I do feel that there is talk of, well, obviously with these four abodes, compassion, altruistic joy, equanimity. I think that very much so that the early arhats had an intention to be of service. It perhaps was not emphasized in literature in the same way that a bodhisattva does. And I believe at one point you had mentioned a teacher, Ajahn Chah, who you felt had a thorough realization, and he was a practitioner on the Theravada path.
Thank you.
Beyond bowing, how can a person of status have no status?
I think when one is completely in relation to the status in such a way that there is no status, that the status may arise in appearance but not in substance. So if one cares for whatever needs their care, they would function in whatever way the situation needs them to function. And I forget who it was, but I was reading about a Tibetan teacher who, one of his students was a yogi ascetic, and the teacher was claiming to be a similar yogi. And his student was really mad at first because his teacher had status. His teacher had a post at a big monastery, and he was involved in all these political situations. And it wasn't until that student saw for themselves what that actually meant, that being a yogi, being an ascetic has nothing to do with the materiality, but the relationship one might have to that. So one could have, the status of of a Karmapa or a Tulku or a Dalai Lama or a great Bodhisattva, of an abbot. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they believe in that identity, although they may play the part. I think it was, I don't know why all these things trigger different things, but there was a Tibetan monk that said a Buddha would be the greatest actor in the world, because if you're nobody, then you can pretend to be anybody. And there was something to that. If you recognize that, you would completely show up in whatever form may be necessary. Soku-san.
So are you nobody?
I guess I'm looking at that right now.
Good luck.
Further questions?
You bowing. There's a question in the chat box from Sanho. His mic isn't working. Can you say more about a tulku? Sanho bowing.
It's just my understanding, a technical term in the Buddhist tradition of a reincarnated teacher, a teacher that has had a realization that allows him to continue to manifest in samsara for the benefit of others. So again, famous ones, His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama is the 14th in a succession of Tulkus, or Trungpa Rinpoche was the 11th Trungpa Tulku. So there's a lot of examples of these lineages of reincarnated teachers that often, in that case, maybe hold a role or a function as the abbot of a monastery or the possessors of certain teachings.
Yvonne, in your reading, I'm thinking specifically of the rules, the 8 rules that Mahapajapati had to agree to. Some of them sound like where the bhikkhunis couldn't be somewhere without monks. Was there any reference to the safety of women in those days as far as that particular rule?
The only thing I came across was as a metaphor, kind of validating why it had to be that way. And the metaphor was just as a house that has more women than men, it's more susceptible to being robbed. There seems to be a lot, though, that the Buddha did not want the bhikkhunis to be able to function autonomously, and that they really had to fall into line within the hierarchy that was there for them. This is, again, something that I've noticed in reading about Buddhism seems to be more and more emphasized as the tradition is institutionalized. That when you find teachers that don't function out of an adherence to an institution, you see much more free exchange of the Dharma and transmission of the Dharma without discrimination. But in these systems where there's a strong form of rules and protocol and procedures, there's much more in them that creates that discrimination between men and women. Yes, Soku-san.
How does as you see it, the Order of Immediate Light, this particular organization, how does it possibly, say it in a couple of ways, how does it support the practice of women? And how does it possibly not be supportive of women as a gender?
What shows up right away, and I'll do my best to respond, is that I'm not qualified to respond as not being a woman in this Sangha, that there are 5 ordained women and a number of women that are dedicated long-term practitioners here.
You could say how your view of it. I mean, you're a Dharma teacher, so just give we realize there could be some opinion involved, of course.
I feel like you always set me up to put my foot in my mouth, and so I'll do my best. And I will just say this bluntly, that I feel that the most insightful students at SokukoJi are the women here. I feel a level of strength that is not based on inspiration for authority. I don't find sort of defensiveness or aggressiveness. And I find a much more soft approach that is steeped in a type of intelligence that doesn't look to get acknowledged, and therefore it may show up as not seeing something or being pacifists. And at the same time, it is a type of intelligence and compassion that is often lost through the outflowing or outbursts of more masculine energy.
Thank you, sir.
Chiezan.
First of all, thank you for what you just said. I really appreciate it. What is your understanding of giving yourself to the path? Like,
I think this is what I was asking about with SokukoJi a little bit during As It Is, the seduction back into relative truth. And when I say that, I just mean that in our minds, we love this idea of Robaishi. It's great. We love the ideas of compassion and wisdom. We love the ideas of being responsible for how we feel. But when it becomes more immediate, we instantly go into trying to pacify in such a way that we feel better. Forgot your question.
how do you understand giving yourself to the path? This is from one of the pregnancies.
So in those situations, it seems that there has to be at least some inspiration to relate to the material that arises in our world as the path. And I think that one of the most obvious ways is that when we find somebody else and we think that they're an obstruction or an obstacle or a disturbance or a disruption on the path, and we say, yes, but, yes, I know it's the path, but, yes, but. And it's not that we can't say that, and it's not to say that things may not be modified, but in the midst of it, the primary situation, even if a relative adjustment has to occur or does occur, there has to be some sense that we are still using that to look at the positionality and the belief and identity that continues to arise. So your final question this evening, SokukoJi?
SokukoJi bowing. Would it be, well, how would it look to you if there was a female sitting up there? Bowing.
How would it feel?
Or look, or like, what is that?
I wouldn't have any particular, I wouldn't defend anything. I don't think that we should do away. I mean, Siddhartha Gautama, if he was a historical figure, which it seems like he was, that should be acknowledged, that there was somebody who sat down and sat under the Bodhi tree, but I don't feel any particular magnetism towards the gender of it. And in some ways in the Vajrayana, that's actually a break in Samaya to see your teacher as a gender. That's actually my understanding is there is, in reading about the Samaya vows, and I don't know, I've not had those in a formal sense, that to consider your teacher male or female is a break in Samaya.
That's true.
SokukoJi bowing. So there's this story of Siddhartha Gautama. Is the Buddha female or male?
No, there was a body, perhaps. May have had a penis. But the form is dependently arisen. The form is not indicative of anything. And so the realization is not confined. My understanding, the realization is not confined or does not require a particular form to express its nature. So in this kalpa, it was Siddhartha, but who knows, if we want to talk about metaphysically what's to come. Mundo.
Mundo bowing. Eddie is asking for you to repeat the name of the Three Nuns poetry book.
There was the first free women poems of the early Buddhist nuns. Jishin, did you buy this for Soka-san initially?
Yes.
I think our first copy came from Jishin, and then I think most of us have a copy. The other one I was looking at was the first Buddhist women poems and stories of awakening by Susan Murcott. Mozuku.
Mozuku bowing, thinking about the extra rules for bhikkhunis. Some of those sound like wanting just more control in that area. Is there a threat inherent in women on the path that would lead people to want to, even historically, any understanding of where that desire for control would come from?
There's no inherent threat to the path. There's no inherent threat, because if there was, then you get back to a type of solidity of something that can be maintained or destroyed. And I certainly don't have the cultural context of what was happening in, you know, the 5th or 6th century BCE in India, but it's not surprising to anybody that, you know, all the major cultures, many of the cultures around the world have been based on a patriarchy, a structure where men have primary power and assert the rules. I do feel that Buddhism has a type of thread, though, that is unique, in that Buddhism throughout time has constantly gone against itself institutionally, that you have these great teachers and masters that recognize an essence and are no longer confined by an institution. Oftentimes, the institution sees this as a threat, like the early desert fathers, the Gnostic Christians, soon after Christ's death, were seen as a threat by the Vatican. So they were able to use their power to eradicate them. But here we are in Buddhism, where we have a living tradition of these great Zen masters that recognize that whoever was prepared to hear these teachings, they were ready to give them to them. And I look at as I said, I'm studying Kodo Sawaki Roshi, and he, of the 8 people he transmitted, 3 were women, and that was not an issue. That wasn't like something that needed to be broadcast, because he had 8 people that he saw were ready for this. Same thing with Bodhidharma. Said of those 5 people, you know, Hui Ko's the one we know most closely, but one of his disciples was a woman. There's speculation that Prajnatara was also a female master that transmitted these teachings to Bodhidharma. But again, we just have to be very considerate to recognize our allegiance is not to structure and institution, but it's to seeing the truth and utilizing the means we have in order to see that truth. Sure.
Bowing. My understanding is Soka-san has asked for some women to be escorted home by a man at different times.
Yes.
And could you say what that's about?
No. You know what that's about? That's so long.
Ask me.
What is it of Shogo Bowing? Why do you ask a man to escort women home?
Well, take a look, go look in the mirror. Someone going to attack you in the middle of the night? We're not saying that men and women are equal. We say they need to have equal opportunity. That's the way I would say it to do. But also we need to protect people. Just like the people are, I'm not saying there aren't women right in this room that could kick your butt. You follow me? But if someone is, a woman is walking alone, it can be asking for trouble, because there's a lot of insanity in the world. Does that make sense? And that's what he's saying. You know what that is. Is there some other area that maybe perhaps we're both missing that you want to know about?
No, I clarified. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Jishin Bowing. Sokusan from time to time says that he recognizes the prejudice he has, even having such a well-trained mind and being so aware of it. I'm wondering whether do you think that it is possible for men, unless they train their mind, to see something which is so deeply ingrained through generations as a certain attitude towards women? Bowing.
I think it's probably pretty hard to see any form of prejudice without some investigation, because seeing prejudice is not just the conceptual acknowledgement, just seeing the framework of any form of oppression or prejudice or discrimination that occurs in the world. But to be able to function and not be manipulated by that prejudice needs to come at a level that's not just something you're going to read in a book. I think we all are aware of those types of prejudice. And I think that the idea of prioritizing communication where one actually has a curiosity may allow us to begin to look at something in a way that's not available. So empowering communication, empowering voices to be able to say, even though it looks this way to 8 of you, for 2 of us it looks very different, and to have a willingness to really acknowledge that majority doesn't mean anything. Consensus, SokukoJi has used that word consensus reality to talk about the insanity of the world. So I think that listening and considering even something as painful or challenging or doesn't fit within what we want, or, well, don't, you know, things are going fine, just, can't you just deal with it? Can't you, it's not that big of a deal, is it? Just trying to maintain a status quo. But yes, I think the mind training is necessary to have a fundamental or more foundational understanding of prejudice that's not just about being able to say or acknowledge or talk about prejudice. Yoka.
Yoka Bowing, question from Adriana on YouTube. Adriana Bowing, Chiezan, do each have a grandmother's heart?
I think that's what Dogen's trying to say, that it's the grandmother's heart is, again, it's not form. It's a type of caring for others that does not require reciprocation. It is not a type of caring that is transacted. So I think that, yes, I think that's available, but I don't think that it's something just like Jishin's asking that we're necessarily going to recognize unless we really look at the deep-rooted fear that causes us to see enemies and to distance ourselves from what is threatening. Yes, I think so. Thank you very much.
Hi, this is Chiezan, the prior at SokukoJi Buddhist Monastery. SokukoJi offers these talks without expecting anything in return. If you value these talks and would like them to continue, please visit our donate page at www.sokukoji.org. Thank you.